At 0150 on May 19, 1944, Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton stood inside the cramped Combat Information Center of USS England watching his sonar operator follow a contact moving at 6 knots beneath the dark waters north of Bougainville. He was 37 years old on his first war patrol as commanding officer with 0 submarine kills. The Japanese Imperial Navy had deployed 7 submarines in a scouting line across the route to the Marianas. England was a Buckley-class destroyer escort about 77 feet shorter than a fleet destroyer. Much of the crew was trained for one mission hunting submarines. The weapon that set her apart was mounted on the foredeck with 24 spigot mortars arranged in rows. The British called it Hedgehog. The projectiles fired about 200 yards ahead of the ship in a circular pattern using contact fuses that only exploded when striking a solid target. Depth charges had been used against submarines for decades. They were dropped from the stern with hydrostatic fuses set to an estimated depth with the hope the submarine would still be there when they detonated. The statistics were harsh. British forces carried out 5,174 depth charge attacks during the war and achieved only 85 confirmed kills, which meant roughly 1 kill for every 60 attacks. By the time the charges reached depth, submarines often moved away. The blasts disturbed the water so much that sonar became ineffective for 15 minutes, allowing submarines to escape. Hedgehog changed this approach. It fired forward and allowed sonar contact to continue during the attack. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds with 35 pounds of torpex. Misses were silent with no water disturbance and no loss of contact. Early trials showed only a 5% success rate, so crews were unsure of its reliability. Captains preferred the familiar effect of depth charges. Pendleton trusted the data. Hedgehog produced 1 kill for every 5 attacks compared to 1 kill for every 80 depth charge attempts. The numbers were clear. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had decoded a transmission from the Japanese submarine I-16 4 days earlier showing its destination Bougainville and arrival time 2,200 hours on May 19. The intelligence was accurate. England and 2 sister ships positioned themselves along its route. Now the contact was confirmed. The sonar operator reported the range at 1,500 yards as I-16 began diving. This was a standard Japanese evasion tactic involving sharp turns and depth changes. The submarine commander knew he was being tracked. Pendleton ordered the first Hedgehog attack at 1341. 24 projectiles arced through the sky and entered the Pacific, sinking at about 23 feet per second. There was no explosion. It was a miss as I-16 had turned away. The second attack produced 1 hit at 130 feet and the explosion lifted England's bow, but it was not enough. The third attack also missed. The fathometer then showed the issue. I-16 had gone deeper to around 325 feet, which was beyond Pendleton's earlier estimate. During the fourth attack, the submarine turned within the pattern and avoided damage. At 1433, the fifth attack produced 4 detonations followed by 6 more. A powerful underwater explosion followed, lifting England's stern out of the water and knocking sailors off balance. 20 minutes later, debris appeared on the surface, including oil, wood and fabric. I-16 was destroyed with 107 crew lost. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had also decoded another message indicating that 7 more Japanese submarines were stationed in a patrol line north of the Admiralty Islands and England was heading directly toward them. Commander Hamilton Haines received this intelligence at Tulagi on May 20. The Japanese 7th Submarine Squadron had placed 7 Type RO submarines along a line labeled NA. These submarines were positioned at fixed intervals from Truk Island to waters west of Manus. They included RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-108, RO-109, RO-112 and RO-116. Each carried about 56 crew members. Their mission was to detect American carrier task forces moving toward the Marianas or Palau Islands. Admiral Somu Toyota needed information on the next American move, and these submarines served as his reconnaissance line. Haines ordered England to join the destroyer escorts George and Raby. 3 ships now faced 7 submarines. The situation appeared difficult, but Pendleton had already demonstrated something important in the engagement with I-16. 5 Hedgehog attacks had resulted in 1 confirmed kill, which meant a 20% success rate. This was 4 times higher than early trial results. The weapon proved effective and the crew now trusted it. They had seen the results through explosions, debris, and spreading oil slicks. The group departed Purvis Bay on May 21 using a line abreast formation with 16,000 yards between ships during darkness. Radar sweeps were conducted every 30 seconds while sonar operated continuously. The Japanese submarines had shifted to radio silence, so there were no further transmissions to intercept. The hunter-killer group would need to locate them using detection equipment, patience, and calculation. Pendleton reviewed charts in his cabin, noting that the NA line stretched across routes previously used by Admiral Halsey. The Japanese strategy was predictable, placing submarines where American forces had operated before in the hope they would return. However, Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had provided an advantage the Japanese did not realize. The Americans knew the exact position of the patrol line. The remaining factor was timing. Submarine patrol routines were consistent. They surfaced at night to recharge batteries and submerged at dawn, remaining underwater throughout daylight hours. Surface again after sunset. The window for radar detection was limited. Submarines were exposed on the surface, but they remained fast. A submarine commander could dive within 60 seconds and reach 200 feet depth in about 3 minutes, then disappear into dark water. England's crew had trained for this situation. Sonar operators were able to track a diving submarine, calculate its depth, estimate speed, and predict its position. The Hedgehog launchers could be prepared and fired within 90 seconds. 24 projectiles created a circle about 130 feet wide and reached a depth near 30 feet. Each launch carried risk. Contact fuses provided certainty. If the projectiles detonated, they had struck a target. If there was no sound, they had missed. The calculation was direct but severe. 7 submarines with 56 crew members each meant 392 Japanese sailors. 1 Hedgehog attack could eliminate all of them within seconds. At 0350 on May 22, George's radar detected a surface contact at 15,000 yards. The first submarine, RO-106, was recharging batteries and did not detect the approaching destroyer escorts. George's searchlight illuminated the submarine on the surface and it immediately performed a crash dive. Water filled the ballast tanks and the bow angled downward. Within 90 seconds it was submerged. George launched a Hedgehog attack at 0415. 24 projectiles entered the water. There was no explosion. It was a miss. England regained sonar contact at 0425 at a range of 1,400 yards. RO-106 was operating deep and making sharp turns. The Japanese commander used known tactics by turning within the attack pattern and changing depth continuously to disrupt targeting. Pendleton relied on data instead of estimation. His sonar operator tracked each movement and reported depth changes, range, and bearing. This information guided the Hedgehog firing solution. The first attack failed because RO-106 turned 30 degrees during the projectile descent. 9 seconds allowed the submarine to move about 150 feet. The second attack at 0501 placed 24 projectiles in a circular pattern as they descended. 3 detonations followed by a large underwater explosion confirmed a hit. The shock wave moved across the surface and England's hull vibrated while George and Raby felt it from 400 yards away. By sunrise, an oil slick half a mile wide covered the area with debris including metal and wood. There were no survivors. This was the second confirmed kill. 24 hours after the destruction of I-16, the 3 destroyer escorts reformed their line with 16,000 yard spacing and continued northeast along the NA line. Another submarine remained ahead, either RO-104, RO-105 or one of the remaining units. Japanese commanders maintained radio silence but followed consistent surfacing schedules. Batteries required charging and diesel engines needed air. At 0600 on May 23, Raby's radar detected another surface contact at 22,000 yards. The submarine dived before identification. The Japanese commander had adapted after the loss of RO-106 by remaining deep and forcing the Americans to estimate depth. Raby conducted 4 Hedgehog attacks starting at 0617 and all failed. RO-104 maneuvered within the attack patterns. George then attempted engagement. The first attack at 0717 failed and the following attempts between 0730 and 0810 also missed. The Japanese commander demonstrated strong evasion by turning and changing depth whenever projectiles entered the water, which disrupted calculations. Division Commander Hamilton Haynes observed as England moved into position. England already had 2 confirmed kills while Raby and George had none. A pattern was clear. England's sonar performance or crew efficiency or Pendleton's firing accuracy was superior. Regardless of the cause, England was the most effective unit in the group. Haynes sent a short order that became well known. Proceed, England. Pendleton's first attack failed as RO-104 turned again. The second attack at 0834 produced around 10 to 12 detonations which combined into a continuous explosion. Structural failure sounds followed, including metal stress and internal collapse. A larger underwater explosion occurred minutes later, likely from battery rupture. Oil and debris appeared on the surface by 10:45. This marked the 3rd confirmed kill. Within 72 hours 3 submarines had been destroyed with 163 Japanese sailors lost and 4 targets still remained ahead. At 0120 on May 24, George's radar detected RO-116 on the surface at a range of 15,000 yards. The submarine submerged at 0130. England established sonar contact at 0150. The sequence continued in the same way, with radar detection followed by a crash dive, then sonar tracking and a Hedgehog attack. However, RO-116's commander had altered his method. He remained at a shallow depth near 150 feet. Most submarine commanders preferred deeper levels around 300 or 400 feet to place more water between themselves and the surface and gain protection from explosions. RO-116's commander chose the opposite approach by staying shallow and making sharp turns, expecting the Americans to set their firing solutions for deeper targets. This assumption was incorrect. Pendleton's sonar operator identified the shallow depth and the Hedgehog solution adjusted immediately. The first attack at 0214 resulted in 3 detonations, possibly 5. It was not the large explosion seen in earlier engagements, and there was no battery rupture. Instead, the impact came from 65-pound projectiles striking the pressure hull at high speed and creating small openings. At a depth of 150 feet, seawater entered rapidly through these openings. Structural failure sounds were limited, but the pressure on the hull increased steadily. The submarine began to sink further as more water entered. Additional flooding increased weight, which forced it deeper. At 300 feet, pressure rose significantly, causing even more water to enter. Internal conditions worsened as heat and pressure increased. Within minutes, the crew could not survive. The submarine continued descending until destruction was complete. Oil and debris appeared on the surface at 0702 after sunrise. The initial amount was small, but the oil spread over a wide area during the next day. Another 56 sailors were lost, marking the 4th confirmed kill within 5 days. News of these actions reached Ernest King at the Navy Department in Washington, where he served as Chief of Naval Operations and directed the entire United States Navy. He reviewed the reports, which described 1 destroyer escort achieving 4 confirmed kills within 5 days using a weapon many captains did not fully trust. King sent a direct message to the 3rd Fleet stating that there would always be an England in the United States Navy. This statement spread quickly across the Pacific Fleet. England gained recognition, but increased attention also brought new decisions. On May 25, William Halsey Jr. proposed removing England from submarine hunting and assigning her to carrier escort duty due to her value. For successful engagements had made the crew highly experienced and such crews were limited. Protecting the ship was a priority. Commander Hamilton Haines did not agree. 3 submarines still remained along the NA line, which were RO-105, RO-108 and RO-109. England had already destroyed 4 submarines in 5 days, and calculations suggested the remaining targets could be eliminated within a short period. Removing the ship at this stage would leave the mission incomplete and allow Japanese submarines to continue reporting American fleet movements, which would reduce the intelligence advantage. Halsey accepted 1 additional patrol. At 23:03 on May 26, Raby detected RO-108 on radar at a range of 15,000 yards, about 110 nautical miles northeast of Seadler Harbor. The submarine submerged soon after detection. England established sonar contact at a distance of 1,650 yards. The Japanese commander repeated the earlier error by staying shallow and making sharp turns while assuming tracking would fail. Pendleton's crew had already engaged multiple submarines and understood these maneuvers. Raby attempted an attack but failed to achieve a hit with Hedgehog. Commander Haines issued the order for England to proceed. At 23:23 England launched its attack on RO-108. Several projectiles struck the target, producing explosions that occurred almost simultaneously. The submarine was destroyed immediately as the pressure hull failed at multiple points. There was no gradual flooding. The vessel collapsed under pressure and the crew of 56 was lost within seconds. This marked the 5th confirmed kill achieved within 6 days, bringing the total number of Japanese sailors lost in these engagements to 279. At the Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo, Admiral Somu Toyoda examined the patrol situation. 7 submarines had been deployed along the NA line and 5 were now missing. There were no distress signals and no emergency transmissions, only silence. The loss rate suggested 1 submarine was being destroyed each day. The pattern indicated a consistent threat that was both effective and rapid. The threat was precise and difficult to evade. Admiral Somu Toyoda issued updated instructions to the remaining submarines. RO-105 and RO-109 received these orders on May 27. The new patrol depth was set at a minimum of 400 feet. Surface procedures were restricted, with battery charging only when required. A revised evasion method was also introduced. Submarines were to remain silent upon first detection and avoid sharp maneuvers. Sudden turns created noise and improved sonar tracking for the enemy. The Japanese forces were adapting, but their adjustments came after earlier losses. England, along with George and Raby, continued moving northeast. 2 submarines remained within a search area of about 3,000 square miles. The Americans still held an advantage. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific continued intercepting Japanese communications. Each message provided position data and revealed patrol behavior. However, the tactical situation was evolving. 5 confirmed kills had reduced England's Hedgehog ammunition. Each attack required 24 projectiles and 5 attacks had used 120 rounds. England carried 240 rounds in total, leaving 120 remaining. This allowed for 5 more attacks, or possibly 6 with careful use. At the same time, Japanese submarines were improving their tactics. On May 30, George detected RO-105 on radar at 21:45. The submarine dived immediately and then applied a new approach. It descended to about 400 feet and shut down all engines. There was complete silence with no propeller movement or mechanical vibration, which made sonar detection difficult. England gained contact at a range of 2,200 yards, but the signal was weak and inconsistent. The submarine was barely moving. Sonar operators referred to this as a knuckle, which created false returns and made the exact position uncertain within about 200 yards. Pendleton faced a decision. He could launch a hedgehog attack at an uncertain target and likely waste 24 projectiles, or he could wait for movement and risk losing the tactical advantage. He chose to wait. 4 hours passed with the submarine remaining silent. At 0230 on May 31 the signal became stronger as RO-105 started moving. Battery levels were low and the electric motors required recharging. The commander needed to surface soon or risk failure. He attempted one final strategy. At 0315 on May 31 RO-105 surfaced but not at the expected location. During the silent period the submarine had drifted with the current and moved about 3 miles from its last known position. George detected it on radar at 13,000 yards, but the direction was unexpected. The search group had been scanning the wrong area. By the time England adjusted course, RO-105 had already submerged again. The Japanese commander gained about 90 seconds on the surface, which allowed limited battery charging and engine operation, providing enough power to continue movement. England regained sonar contact at 0345. RO-105 was moving deep and fast at about 6 knots, heading northeast away from the search group. The Japanese commander showed strong awareness and had learned from previous losses. He understood that staying deep and maintaining speed reduced the effectiveness of hedgehog attacks. However, the challenge returned to calculation. Hedgehog projectiles descended at about 23 feet per second. At a depth of 400 feet they required around 17 seconds to reach the target zone. During that time a submarine traveling at 6 knots could move about 170 feet. This meant the firing solution depended on accurately predicting the future position of the submarine within those 17 seconds. A wrong prediction meant the circular pattern would miss entirely. Pendleton's first hedgehog attack at 0405 missed by about 200 feet. RO-105 had turned while the projectiles were descending. The second attack at 0423 missed by roughly 100 feet. The estimate improved but remained inaccurate. The submarine kept changing speed from 6 knots to 4 knots and back to 6 knots, which made calculations difficult. England had already used 48 projectiles, which left 72 remaining from the original 120. This allowed for about 3 more attacks, or slightly more if handled carefully. That meant only a few chances remained to destroy RO-105 before ammunition was exhausted. Division Commander Haynes observed from George. This engagement was different from earlier ones. The previous 5 submarines were destroyed quickly within 2 or 3 attacks. RO-105 had survived 2 attempts and was approaching a third. The Japanese commander was performing well in terms of timing and movement. At 0447 Pendleton's sonar operator identified a pattern. RO-105 turned every 4 minutes, shifting about 30 degrees to port then 30 degrees to starboard in a repeated cycle. The pattern was consistent and predictable. The commander likely believed the movement was random, but human behavior tends to follow patterns. Pendleton adjusted the firing solution and predicted the next turn, leading the target by about 200 feet. The third hedgehog attack at 0508 launched 24 projectiles into the water, which descended into darkness. 4 or 5 detonations occurred. This was not a full destruction, but it confirmed that the pressure hull had been damaged. The submarine continued moving while taking on water. The Japanese commander initiated emergency actions by attempting to blow ballast tanks and surface to evacuate the crew. Before this could be completed, England launched a 4th attack at 0532, which produced around 8 detonations. The submarine broke apart and the emergency procedure failed. The crew did not reach the surface. Oil and debris appeared at 0615 after sunrise, confirming the 6th kill. Within 12 days 6 submarines had been destroyed and about 335 Japanese sailors were lost. Admiral William Halsey Jr. received the report at 3rd Fleet Headquarters. 6 submarines destroyed in 12 days by a single destroyer escort using a weapon many commanders had doubted. The outcome was unprecedented and difficult to ignore. 1 submarine remained, which was RO-109. On June 1 Halsey issued new orders to withdraw England from submarine hunting. 6 confirmed kills were considered sufficient. The destroyer escort had demonstrated the effectiveness of the Hedgehog system beyond doubt. All destroyer escorts in the Pacific Fleet would now receive updated training and improved tactics based on England's operational reports. RO-109 was never located. It had received warnings after the loss of RO-108 and left its patrol area moving deep and silent toward Truk. It survived the war and surrendered in August 1945. Its crew later learned about the destruction of the NA line months after the events. They discovered that 6 submarines had been eliminated within 12 days by a single ship using a weapon they had not encountered before. The Presidential Unit Citation was awarded in July, making England one of only 3 destroyer escorts to receive this recognition during the war. The citation stated that the ship displayed extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese submarines. The statement was brief and did not fully reflect the scale of the achievement. The numbers provided a clearer understanding. British forces had conducted 5,174 depth charge attacks during the war with 85 confirmed kills, which resulted in a success rate of about 1.6%. Early Hedgehog operations before England's patrol showed about a 5% success rate, which meant around 26 attacks were needed for 1 confirmed kill. England achieved results with much higher efficiency. 6 submarines were destroyed in roughly 15 attacks, which produced a success rate near 40%. This was about 25 times more effective than depth charges and about 8 times higher than the average Hedgehog performance. The system was adopted across all destroyer escorts by September 1944. Training methods changed throughout the fleet. Sonar operators studied England's tracking approach. Hedgehog crews practiced the same loading methods. Fire control officers learned the firing calculations used during these engagements. In the Atlantic, Hedgehog weapons sank 47 German U-boats by the end of the war, with 268 attacks resulting in 47 confirmed kills, which gave a success rate of about 17.5%. It remained the most effective anti-submarine weapon of the conflict. However, no vessel matched England's record achieved within 12 days across any theatre. Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton received the Navy Cross in August for his role in these operations. The award recognized his tactical decisions, his crew discipline, and the effectiveness of the weapon system. The reports did not emphasize the key factor, which was calculation. Pendleton relied on data while many others relied on tradition. He used precise firing solutions while others depended on experience. He predicted submarine movement while others estimated. The results confirmed the accuracy of his approach. England continued service through the summer of 1944, performing convoy protection, carrier screening, and anti-submarine patrol duties. It did not encounter another submarine and did not use Hedgehog in combat again. On October 31, 1944, a kamikaze aircraft struck England near Leyte Gulf. The explosion penetrated the forward engine room and caused 37 deaths, with 25 additional crew members injured. The damage was severe. Repairs would have required about 6 months and cost more than constructing a new vessel. The Navy decided not to restore the ship. It was towed to Manus Island stripped of usable equipment and later sold for scrap. In November 1946 it was dismantled in a salvage yard, ending the service of the ship that had destroyed 6 submarines within 12 days. The record remained unmatched and continues to stand. Even decades later, England is regarded as one of the most effective submarine hunters in naval history. Walton Pendleton survived the war and was promoted to commander. He later led an escort division in Alaska and spent the final phase of the war conducting anti-submarine patrols in the North Pacific without further engagements. The war ended in August 1945. He retired from the Navy in 1961 after 34 years of service and died in 1973 at age 66. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His gravestone records the Navy Cross but does not mention the 6 submarines or the 12-day period that influenced naval warfare. The Navy continued the name England in a limited way. In October 1960, a guided missile destroyer leader named USS England DLG-22 was commissioned. It later carried the designation CG-22 and served from 1962 until 1994, completing 32 years, which was longer than the original vessel. After its decommissioning, the name England was no longer used within the fleet. The original Hedgehog launcher is stored at the National Museum of the United States Navy. It remains largely unnoticed by visitors. The display notes the weapon's effectiveness but does not highlight England or Pendleton or the short period that demonstrated its full capability. Japanese records recovered after the war confirmed the 6 submarine losses, which included I-16, RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-108 and RO-105. Each recorded position matched the locations of England's attacks. A total of 335 sailors were confirmed dead. Japanese reports described explosions above and flooding below, followed by rapid loss of the vessel. There were no survivors to explain the circular projectile pattern, the contact fuses, or the forward firing system that allowed continuous sonar tracking during the attack. The Hedgehog system was developed by British engineers, improved by American forces, and proven in combat by England. Despite this, history often focuses on larger warships such as aircraft carriers, battleships, and fleet destroyers. Destroyer escorts were considered expendable and easy to replace, with about 700 built during the war and many removed from service within a few years. England itself remained active for only a short period after the war before being scrapped. The ship that achieved 6 submarine kills in 12 days was not preserved despite its impact. If this account was meaningful, consider supporting the channel. Each interaction helps share these historical events with a wider audience. Subscribing and enabling notifications allows continued coverage of similar topics. Share your location in the comments and mention any family connections to military service. Engagement from viewers helps maintain awareness of these events and ensures that the service of USS England and its crew is not overlooked.